Commander Zexathara stood on the bridge of his massive warship and watched the small blue planet grow larger on the viewing screen. Earth looked peaceful from this distance, with its white clouds and green lands. The intelligence report said this would be easy. The humans had barely learned to travel between planets, and their weapons were old and weak. Most of their world was split into many small countries that fought each other more than they worked together. This should take no more than a few hours. Zexathara had conquered 12 worlds for the Caltherian Empire. Each time the pattern was the same. Show up with overwhelming force, demand surrender, and watch the locals give up when they saw how hopeless their situation was. The smart ones always chose to live rather than die for nothing. Only the very stupid species chose to fight when they had no chance of winning. The human ship appeared on their sensors like a small metal dot. It was called the Defiance according to their communication signals. Zexathara almost laughed at the name. What could these primitive beings possibly defy? His fleet had 50 warships, each 10 times larger than anything the humans had ever built. His weapons could turn their entire moon into dust in minutes. Captain Jake Morrison's voice came through the communication system. He sounded calm for someone facing certain death. Caltherian Fleet, this is Captain Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. You are not welcome in our system. Turn around and leave now, or we will defend ourselves. Zexathara clicked his mandibles in amusement. The human actually thought he could give orders to a Caltherian commander. Human Captain, I am Commander Zexathara of the Caltherian Empire. Your world now belongs to us. Surrender immediately, and your people will be treated well. Resist, and you will all die. You have 10 minutes to decide. The response came back faster than expected. Commander, let me save you some time. The answer is no. We don't surrender. We don't bow. We don't give up our freedom to anyone. If you want our world, come and take it. Something in the human's voice made Zexathara pause. He had heard defiance before, but this was different. There was no fear in those words, no desperation, just a cold certainty that chilled him in a way he did not understand. Still, words were just words. Actions would show the truth. The battle began when Zexathara gave the attack order. His ships moved forward in perfect formation while the single, human vessel charged straight at them. It was suicide, but the humans seemed to welcome it. The Defiance fired its primitive missiles and energy weapons that barely scratched the paint on Caltherian hulls. Return fire should have destroyed the small ship instantly, but the human ship kept moving. Even when holes appeared in its hull and fire burned inside its corridors, it kept fighting. More human ships appeared from behind Earth's moon. Old cargo vessels fitted with weapons, mining ships carrying nuclear bombs, even civilian pleasure craft loaded with explosives. They came at the Caltherian fleet like angry insects attacking a giant. Zexathara watched in growing confusion as his sensors showed something impossible. The human ships were not trying to retreat when damaged. Instead, they accelerated toward his vessels. Several human captains rammed their dying ships into Caltherian hulls. The explosions were small, but the message was clear. These beings would rather die than live as slaves. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan's ship lost power and life support, but she kept firing manually. Her hands were burned from exposed wires, and her face was bloody from broken glass, but she never stopped. When her ship finally exploded, she was still at her weapons station. Her last transmission was not a plea for help or mercy. It was target coordinates for the remaining human vessels. The space around Earth filled with debris from both fleets. Zexathara had won the engagement, but the cost shocked him. He had lost 8 ships to these primitive humans, 8 warships that represented years of construction and thousands of crew members. In his previous conquests, he rarely lost even one vessel, but the real shock came when he analyzed the human tactics. They had not fought like any species he knew. They coordinated their attacks with perfect timing. They shared information instantly, across their entire fleet. When one ship was destroyed, Others immediately moved to fill its position. It was like fighting a single creature with many bodies instead of separate ships with separate crews. The human Captain Morrison's ship was the last to fall. It had taken damage that should have killed everyone aboard 3 times over. Yet it kept firing until the very end. Morrison's final words echoed across all frequencies. "Tell Earth we held them. Tell them we bought time. Tell them to make it count." Zexthera stared at the wreckage floating in space and felt something he had never experienced before. These humans had lost completely, but somehow it felt like they had won something important. They had shown that the mighty Caltherian Empire could bleed. They had proven that some beings valued freedom more than life itself. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Zexthera wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The dropships fell from the sky like metal rain. Zexthera watched from his command ship as thousands of Caltherian soldiers descended toward Earth's major cities. Despite the unexpected resistance in space, he felt confident about the ground. Invasion. Space battles were one thing, but planetary conquest was different. Once the humans saw Caltherian soldiers walking through their streets, they would understand that resistance was hopeless. The first landing zones were supposed to be secure within hours. Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and dozens of other cities would fall quickly to superior Caltherian weapons and armor. The human military was scattered and weak. Their police forces had only simple firearms. Their civilians were soft and helpless. This phase should be the easiest part of the entire conquest, but the reports coming back from the surface told a different story. In Chicago, Police Sergeant Lisa Barnes had turned the city into a maze of death traps. She organized construction workers to block streets with concrete barriers. She taught office workers how to make explosives from cleaning supplies. She turned every building into a fortress and every intersection into a killing ground. The Caltherian soldiers found themselves fighting not just human military units, but everyone. Shopkeepers fired hunting rifles from store windows. Bus drivers used their vehicles as weapons. Even children threw rocks and bottles filled with gasoline. The humans seemed to have no concept of civilian and military. Everyone was a combatant. In rural Montana, farmer Pete Johnson used his knowledge of the land like a weapon. He led Caltherian patrols into box canyons where human snipers waited. He poisoned water sources that the invaders needed. He used his farming equipment to plant mines in roads and fields. His small group of neighbors and family members moved through the countryside like ghosts, striking without warning and disappearing before the Caltherians could respond. What disturbed Zexthera most was how quickly the humans adapted. Within days of the landings, they had learned to avoid Caltherian sensors. They discovered weak points in alien armor. They figured out how to jam communication frequencies. These were supposed to be primitive beings, but they learned faster than species with centuries more technology. The situation at Denver General Hospital showed how strange these humans truly were. When Caltherian forces surrounded the building, they expected quick surrender. Hospitals were supposed to be places of healing, not fighting. But Dr. Karen Walsh and maintenance worker Tony Rodriguez turned the entire facility into a defensive position. Patients who could barely walk insisted on helping. Nurses who had never held weapons learned to fight. Even people who were dying of diseases demanded to contribute to the defense. Zexthera received hourly reports of similar scenes across the planet. In Seattle, librarian Nancy Clark used her knowledge of the city to guide resistance fighters through underground tunnels. In Miami, fisherman Carlos Ruiz taught urban fighters how to move silently through water-filled areas. In Phoenix, teacher Beth Adams organized students into communication networks using amateur radio equipment. The humans refused to follow the normal rules of conquest. When Caltherian forces took strategic locations, the locals did not accept defeat. Instead, they found new ways to fight. They built weapons from scrap metal. They created communication systems from toy electronics. They turned common household items into instruments of war. 3 weeks after the landings, Zexathera realized that his forces controlled buildings and roads, but not the population. Every street corner was potentially dangerous. Every human interaction carried the risk of violence. His soldiers could not relax anywhere because any civilian might be an enemy in disguise. The breaking point came when engineer Danny Green managed to reverse engineer a Caltherian energy weapon using parts salvaged from a destroyed dropship. Within hours, human workshops across the planet were producing crude copies. The weapons were not as good as the originals, but they worked well enough to kill Caltherian soldiers. Mechanic Linda Foster figured out how to disable Caltherian vehicles by targeting specific components. Electrician Paul Sanders learned to hack into alien communication systems. Computer programmer Alex Hayes developed viruses that could crash Caltherian computers. Each human discovery spread instantly across their entire resistance network. But the most frightening development was how the humans treated their dead. In every other conquest, heavy casualties broke enemy morale. Death was supposed to weaken resistance by showing the cost of defiance, but these humans seemed to draw strength from their losses. When Sergeant Lisa Barnes died defending a school, her tactics were studied and improved by others. When Farmer Pete Johnson was killed in an ambush, his methods were taught to resistance groups in other regions. The humans did not mourn their dead with despair. They honored them with greater determination. Each funeral became a recruitment meeting. Each memorial became a planning session for new attacks. Death only made them more dangerous, not less willing to fight. Zexathera found himself reading intelligence reports that made no sense according to everything he knew about conquest psychology. Human children were volunteering for dangerous missions. Human elderly were building bombs in their basements. Human civilians were attacking armed soldiers with nothing but kitchen knives and garden tools. The most disturbing report came from Atlanta, where retired Marine Colonel Sam Rivers had organized a network of resistance cells across 3 states. Using nothing but ham radio and written messages, he coordinated attacks that required precise timing across hundreds of miles. The humans were not just fighting as individuals or even as groups. They were operating as a single organism with millions of parts. From his command ship, Zexathera looked down at the blue planet and felt something cold growing in his chest. The Caltherian Empire had conquered worlds with advanced technology and powerful militaries. But they had never faced anything like this. These humans were changing the rules of war itself. Zexathera spent long hours studying the human behavior patterns that his intelligence teams brought him. What had seemed like mindless violence at first was revealing itself as something far more complex and terrifying. These humans were not just angry animals lashing out at their captors. They were thinking, learning, and adapting at a speed that defied everything the Caltherian Empire knew about conquest warfare. The data showed patterns that should have been impossible. Construction. Worker Danny Green had not only reverse-engineered Caltherian energy weapons, but had improved them. His modifications made the weapons more reliable and easier to manufacture using human tools. Within days, his designs were being built in garages and basements across the planet. The humans were not just copying alien technology, they were making it better. Teacher Michelle Adams had done something even more disturbing. She used her understanding of how children think and learn to create recruitment networks among human youth. Teenagers who should have been hiding in fear were instead becoming some of the most effective resistance fighters. They could move through areas that adults could not reach. They could gather information without being suspected. They turned their schools into intelligence centers and their playgrounds into training grounds. But the real shock came when Zexathera began interrogating human prisoners. Every species the Caltherians had conquered eventually broke under questioning. Fear, pain, isolation, and psychological pressure always worked in the end. But the humans were different in ways that made his interrogation specialists nervous. Nurse. Linda Chen had been captured after treating wounded resistance fighters in an underground clinic. For 6 days, Caltherian interrogators used every technique they knew to break her spirit and extract information. She endured pain that should have shattered her mind. She faced threats that should have terrified her into cooperation, but she never broke. More disturbing, she seemed to be studying her captors while they questioned her. When Chen finally escaped during a rescue operation, the interrogation facility's security systems had been sabotaged from the inside. She had somehow learned enough about Caltharian technology during her imprisonment to disable their defenses. The hunters had become the hunted without anyone realizing it was happening. Mechanic Chris Taylor's capture told an even stranger story. He had been taken while attempting to sabotage a Caltharian supply depot. Under normal circumstances, such a prisoner would be questioned and then executed or enslaved. But Taylor convinced his guards that he could help them maintain their vehicles more efficiently. For 3 weeks, he worked in their motor pool while secretly gathering intelligence about their equipment, their routines, and their weaknesses. When Taylor finally made his escape, half the Caltharian vehicles in the region broke down within hours. He had been systematically sabotaging every machine he touched while appearing to help. His guards never suspected that their helpful prisoner was destroying their capability to fight. These incidents revealed something that chilled Zexathara to his core. The humans were not fighting as separate individuals trying to survive. They were operating as parts of a larger organism that thought and planned on a scale beyond anything he had encountered. Each captured human was not just a prisoner, but a spy gathering information. Each dead human was not just a casualty, but a source of data for the survivors. The evidence was everywhere once he knew what to look for. Retired Marine Colonel Sam. Rivers coordinated resistance activities across vast distances using communication methods that should have been impossible to maintain. Computer programmer Janet Moore had somehow hacked into Caltharian communication networks and was feeding false information to military units. Biochemist Dr. Helen Clark was developing biological weapons specifically designed to target Caltharian physiology. But the most frightening discovery was how quickly human tactics evolved. In the first week of fighting, resistance groups used simple ambush techniques that any species might attempt. By the second week, they were coordinating complex operations involving multiple groups across different cities. By the third week, they were predicting Caltharian movements and setting traps that required detailed knowledge of alien military doctrine. The humans were learning from every engagement, every casualty, every failure. They processed information faster than Caltharian analysts could track. They adapted their strategies in real time based on immediate feedback from the battlefield. It was like fighting an enemy that became more dangerous every time you hurt. Demolitions expert Frank Miller exemplified this terrifying adaptability. He had started the war as a simple construction worker who knew how to use dynamite safely. Within weeks, he had become a master of urban warfare who could bring down entire buildings with surgical precision. His techniques spread through the resistance network faster than Caltharian forces could develop countermeasures. Communications specialist Jennifer Cole showed similar evolution. She began as a ham radio operator who helped coordinate local resistance activities, but she quickly learned to intercept and decode Caltharian military transmissions. By the end of the first month, she was not only listening to alien communications, but actively jamming them while broadcasting human propaganda to other species across the galaxy. The propaganda itself revealed the true scope of human planning. They were not just fighting for their own survival. They were deliberately sending messages to every enslaved species in Caltharian space. The broadcasts contained detailed information about Caltharian military weaknesses, successful resistance tactics, and proof that the mighty empire could be hurt. Zexathara realized with growing horror that the humans had never intended to win this war through conventional military victory. They were fighting a different kind of battle entirely. Every day they survived was a victory. Every Caltharian soldier they killed was a message. Every piece of alien technology they captured and reverse-engineered was a gift to future resistance, movements across the galaxy. The humans had turned their conquest into a learning experience for every oppressed being in known space. They were not just defending their world, they were teaching the universe how to fight back against the Caltharian Empire. Each human death carried more strategic value than most species achieved with their greatest victories. Standing on his command bridge, Zexithara looked down at the blue planet and felt something he had never experienced before in his long military career. For the first time, he was truly afraid. 2 months into the occupation, Zexithara faced a reality that no Caltharian commander had ever encountered. His forces were losing ground to a supposedly primitive species armed with inferior technology. Every day brought new reports of Caltharian casualties, sabotaged equipment, and successful human attacks. What should have been a simple conquest had become a grinding war of attrition that his empire was slowly losing. The human resistance had evolved from desperate civilians throwing rocks to a sophisticated military organization that seemed to anticipate every Caltharian move. Former soldiers like Captain Brad Wilson and Sergeant Nicole Ross had emerged as leaders who understood both human capabilities and alien weaknesses. They coordinated attacks across multiple continents with precision that impressed even Caltharian tactical analysts. The breaking point came when the humans began turning Caltharian technology against itself in ways that should have been impossible. Computer programmer Alex Turner had somehow gained access to orbital communication networks. From a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of Detroit, he fed false information to Caltharian forces while redirecting their supply shipments to resistance-controlled areas. The invaders were literally providing weapons and equipment to their own enemies. Biochemist Dr. Helen Parker had created something even more terrifying. Working in a makeshift laboratory hidden in the mountains of Colorado, she developed biological agents specifically designed to target Caltharian physiology. The weapons were not immediately lethal, but they caused equipment malfunctions by affecting alien nervous systems. Caltharian soldiers began making critical errors in combat situations because their ability to think clearly was compromised. The humans had also learned to exploit every weakness in Caltharian armor and vehicles. Mechanic Tony Rodriguez published detailed guides showing exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Engineer Lisa Foster designed simple tools that could disable alien weapons systems. Electrician Mike Turner created devices that could overload Caltharian power sources using nothing but scavenged electronics. But the most shocking development was how rapidly human technology advanced. 6 weeks earlier, they had been barely capable of spaceflight. Now teams led by physicist Dr. Adam Clark and astronaut commander Rita Hayes were testing crude, faster-than-light drives built from captured Caltharian components. The humans were not just defending their world, they were preparing to take the fight beyond Earth. Zexithara realized that his position was becoming impossible to maintain. His forces controlled major population centers, but the countryside belonged to the resistance. Supply lines were constantly under attack. Communication networks were compromised. Morale among his troops was falling as they faced an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every passing day. The decision to withdraw to orbital positions came after a particularly devastating week. Demolitions expert Frank Miller had coordinated simultaneous attacks on 17 Caltharian bases using techniques that required split-second timing across thousands of miles. Communications specialist Jennifer Cole jammed alien frequencies while broadcasting detailed tactical information to resistance groups worldwide. The humans were no longer just fighting, they were teaching others how to fight. The withdrawal itself became another human victory. As Caltharian forces pulled back to their landing zones, they found that the humans had anticipated this move. Mining engineer Pat Collins had spent weeks preparing the landing sites with hidden explosives. When the evacuation began, carefully placed charges destroyed landing platforms and supply depots that the aliens needed for their retreat. Truck driver Gary Stevens used his knowledge of road networks to coordinate attacks on Caltharian convoy routes. Pilot Susan Walsh flew captured alien aircraft in suicide runs against evacuation ships. Teacher Kevin Adams organized civilian volunteers who threw themselves at Caltherian defensive positions to create gaps for military attacks. The humans seemed willing to sacrifice anything to inflict maximum damage on their retreating enemies. From orbit, Zexathara watched his ground forces struggle to escape a planet that had become a death trap. Every evacuation site was under constant attack. Every transport ship faced human aircraft and surface-to-air missiles. The retreat that should have taken days stretched into weeks as Caltherian forces fought desperately just to reach their ships. But the most disturbing intelligence came from intercepted human communications. The Resistance leadership was not celebrating their tactical victory. Instead, they were planning for the next phase of the war. Construction worker Nancy Brown was organizing teams to build underground factories for spacecraft production. Scientist Dr. Paul Hayes was developing plans to establish human colonies on other worlds, even if Earth was destroyed. The humans had never expected to win this war through conventional means. Their entire strategy was built around survival and propagation. They were preparing to spread across the galaxy like a virus, carrying their knowledge of resistance warfare to every oppressed species they encountered. If the Caltherians destroyed Earth, they would only prove that the human message about freedom was worth dying for. Intelligence reports suggested that small groups of humans had already escaped the planet using modified alien technology. Engineer Maria Santos and physicist Dr. Robert Clark had built crude starships from salvaged components. These vessels were primitive and dangerous, but they were functional. Somewhere in the vastness of space, human refugees were carrying their culture and their knowledge to other worlds. Zexathara faced an impossible choice. Complete destruction of Earth would eliminate the immediate threat, but at a cost that might destroy the Caltherian Empire itself. The humans had already broadcast their story across multiple star systems. Other subjugated species were receiving detailed information about successful resistance techniques. Questions were being asked that had never been asked before. The reports from other Caltherian territories were deeply troubling. On 3 different worlds, enslaved populations had begun organizing resistance movements using tactics copied from human broadcasts. The empire that had seemed eternal was showing cracks as word spread that the mighty Caltherians could be fought and hurt and even defeated by beings they considered inferior. Standing on his command bridge, Zexathara looked down at the blue planet and realized that he had fallen into a trap more sophisticated than anything he could have imagined. The humans had used their own conquest as bait to lure the Caltherian Empire into a war that could not be won through traditional military means. They had turned their defeat into a victory that might ultimately bring down the greatest empire in galactic history. From the bridge of his flagship, Zexathara stared at Earth, floating in the darkness below, and contemplated the impossible choice before him. Total planetary destruction would secure immediate Caltherian victory, but the long-term consequences might destroy everything the Empire had built over centuries. The humans had already achieved something no other species had managed in the long history of Caltherian conquest. They had made the Empire afraid. The military situation was clear. Enough. His orbital weapons could turn the entire planet into molten rock within hours. No human technology could stop such an attack. Earth would burn, and every one of its stubborn inhabitants would die. The immediate threat would be eliminated, and the Caltherian Empire would remain supreme. But the cost of such victory was becoming more apparent with each intelligence report that reached his command ship. The humans had spent months broadcasting their resistance across the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for generations were receiving detailed instructions on everything from weapons manufacturing to communication security. The technical specifications for human-designed anti-Caltherian weapons were spreading through underground networks faster than Imperial forces could suppress them. Destroying Earth now would only confirm that the human message about freedom was worth any sacrifice. Even more disturbing were the reports from Caltherian intelligence services across the Empire. On 17 different worlds, enslaved populations had begun organizing resistance movements using tactics copied directly from human broadcasts. The Vorthak miners of Kepler 442b had destroyed 3 processing facilities using explosives built from human designs. The Zalani farmers of Wolf 359 had sabotaged transport networks using coordination methods learned from Earth's resistance fighters. But the intelligence that truly chilled Zexathara came from deep space monitoring stations. Small human vessels had been detected at the edge of multiple star systems. Engineer Maria Santos and physicist Dr. Robert Clark had not only built functional starships from salvaged Caltherian technology, they had improved the designs. These crude but effective vessels were faster and more maneuverable than anything the humans should have been capable of constructing. The implications were staggering. Human refugees were already spreading across the galaxy, carrying their knowledge and their hatred of oppression to other worlds. Even if Earth died, humanity would survive. Worse, they would serve as living proof that the Caltherian Empire could be defied. Every human settlement would become a training ground for resistance fighters from other species. Construction worker Nancy Brown's underground factories had produced more than just weapons and equipment. Hidden facilities across Earth were manufacturing data storage devices containing the complete technical and tactical knowledge accumulated during the war. These information packages were being loaded onto every spacecraft that escaped the planet. Human knowledge was becoming a virus that would infect every corner of Caltherian space. The economic analysis was equally troubling. The conquest of Earth had already cost more resources than the previous 5 campaigns combined. Caltherian military production was straining to replace losses while maintaining security across dozens of other worlds. The Empire's economy depended on the wealth extracted from conquered territories, but those territories were becoming more expensive to control as human-inspired resistance movements spread. Teacher Kevin Adams had created something that terrified Caltherian sociologists more than any weapon. His educational programs were teaching human children to think in ways that made them naturally resistant to psychological control techniques. These children would grow up to be adults who could not be broken by traditional conquest methods. If any survived the current war, they would breed future generations that were essentially immune to Caltherian domination. The intercepted communications from Earth revealed the true scope of human planning. They had never expected to save their world through military victory. Their entire strategy was built around ensuring that human knowledge and culture would survive even if their planet was destroyed. Scientists like Dr. Paul Hayes were developing generation ships designed to operate for centuries. These vessels would carry human civilization to distant star systems where it could take root and grow. Dr. Helen Parker's biological research had produced weapons specifically designed to target Caltherian physiology, but her real contribution was something far more dangerous. She had created detailed genetic maps showing exactly how human DNA could be preserved and reconstructed. Even if every human on Earth died, their species could theoretically be restored from genetic information stored in hardened databases. The humans were planning for their own extinction while simultaneously ensuring their immortality. They had turned death itself into a weapon against their conquerors. Every human who died carrying alien technology became a teacher for other species. Every human settlement that was destroyed left behind information caches that could be discovered by future resistance movements. Pilot Susan Walsh and engineer Gary Stevens had developed something that made Caltherian military analysts physically ill when they understood its implications. They had created detailed star charts showing the locations of every major Caltherian military installation, supply depot, and administrative center in known space. These charts were being distributed to every human refugee vessel and broadcast to every species in the galaxy. The humans were not just fighting for their own freedom. They were conducting intelligence warfare on a scale that the Caltherian Empire had never faced. They were turning their conquest into a university where enslaved beings could learn how to destroy their oppressors. Every day that Earth survived was another day of education for potential rebels across the galaxy. Zexathara realized that destroying Earth would solve nothing. The damage was already done. Human knowledge had spread too far to be contained. Human refugees had escaped too many systems to be hunted down. The resistance methods that had proven so effective against Caltherian forces were now part of the cultural heritage of dozens of species. For the first time in his military career, Zexathara understood that the Caltherian Empire faced an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional warfare. The humans had created something more dangerous than any weapon or army. They had created hope. They had shown the galaxy that freedom was possible and that the price of tyranny could be made too high for tyrants to pay. Standing alone on his command bridge, Zexathara felt the weight of an empire's future pressing down on him as he contemplated a decision that would change the galaxy forever. 6 months after the first Caltherian ships appeared in Earth's sky, Zexathara made a decision that no commander in the Empire's history had ever been forced to make. He opened communication channels with the human resistance leadership and requested negotiations for a conditional peace treaty. The word requested tasted like poison in his mouth, but the alternative was watching his empire slowly bleed to death across dozens of star systems. The negotiations took place aboard a neutral station at the edge of the solar system. Human. Representatives included former diplomat Rachel Stone, who had spent the war organizing civilian evacuations, and military advisor Colonel Kevin Wright, who had coordinated resistance activities across 3 continents. They arrived in a ship built from salvaged Caltherian technology that was somehow more advanced than the original designs. The humans came to the table not as defeated supplicants begging for mercy, but as equals who had proven their worth through 6 months of the most brutal warfare the galaxy had ever witnessed. They brought detailed intelligence about Caltherian military capabilities, complete technical specifications for alien technology, and comprehensive plans for spreading anti-imperial resistance to every corner of known space. Rachel Stone spoke, with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Commander Zexathara, we appreciate your willingness to discuss terms, but let us be clear about the situation. You cannot conquer us through military force. You cannot break our spirit through intimidation. You cannot destroy us without destroying yourselves. So what exactly are you proposing? The terms that emerged from 3 weeks of careful negotiation would have been unthinkable at the beginning of the war. Humanity accepted limited autonomy within Caltherian space, but retained complete self-governance and the right to maintain defensive forces. In exchange, they agreed to serve as military advisors, helping the Empire handle other difficult species. It was a face-saving arrangement that acknowledged what both sides knew but could not openly admit. The humans had become too dangerous to destroy and too valuable to waste. Their resistance techniques could be used to suppress rebellions on other worlds. Their technological innovations could improve Caltherian military efficiency. Their tactical knowledge could help the Empire maintain control over territories that were becoming increasingly restless. The conquered had become the conquerors through methods that no military academy had ever taught. Colonel Kevin Wright outlined the human contribution to imperial security with clinical precision. We can provide training in counterinsurgency operations, urban warfare tactics, and population control methods. Our specialists understand how resistance movements operate because we created the most successful resistance movement in galactic history. We know how to fight these wars because we fought one and won. The treaty signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy to every species under Caltherian control. The message was carefully crafted to present the agreement as a wise decision to incorporate human military expertise into imperial operations. But enslaved beings throughout known space understood the real meaning. The humans had forced the mighty Caltherian Empire to negotiate. Freedom was possible if the price was high enough. Zexithara returned to the Caltherian homeworld, knowing that everything had changed forever. His reports to the High Command were carefully worded to emphasize human military value while downplaying the precedent set by the negotiations. But privately, he warned selected members of the leadership that the Empire faced fundamental challenges that could not be solved through traditional conquest methods. The humans had proven that advanced technology and overwhelming force were not enough to guarantee victory. They had shown that primitive species could learn, adapt, and evolve faster than their conquerors could respond. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that the idea of freedom could spread faster than imperial forces could suppress it. The galaxy would never be the same. On Earth, human children learned about the Caltherian War in schools run by teachers like Professor Nancy Evans and Dr. Stephen Parker. They studied the conflict not as a defeat or even a victory, but as humanity's first step toward the stars. The curriculum included both Earth history and galactic politics, preparing the next generation for a universe where humans would play a much larger role. The children learned about heroes like Captain Jake Morrison, who died fighting impossible odds in space. They studied the tactics of Sergeant Lisa Barnes, who turned urban warfare into an art form. They memorized the innovations of engineers like Danny Green and Maria Santos, who reverse-engineered alien technology and made it better. But most importantly, they learned that freedom was worth any sacrifice and that no enemy was too powerful to resist. Construction worker Tony Rodriguez, now serving as a liaison between human and Caltherian forces, often visited these schools to share his experiences. He told the children about the day he realized that humans could not be conquered because they refused to accept conquest. He explained how ordinary people became extraordinary through their determination to remain free. He taught them that the greatest victory was not defeating an enemy but proving that defeat was impossible. The treaty established Earth as a semi-autonomous region within the Caltherian Empire, but everyone understood that this was only the beginning. Human refugees continued to spread across the galaxy, establishing settlements on distant worlds and sharing their knowledge with other species. The resistance techniques that had proven so effective against Imperial forces were becoming standard, training for anyone who valued freedom. Dr. Helen Parker's research facilities produced more than weapons and defensive technologies. Her teams developed medical treatments, agricultural improvements, and industrial processes that made human settlements valuable trading partners rather than conquered territories. The species that had been dismissed as primitive was becoming an essential component of galactic civilization. In his private quarters aboard the flagship, Zexithara often studied intelligence reports about human activities across the Empire. They were building, learning, teaching, and growing in ways that suggested they had never really been conquered at all. The peace treaty had simply recognized a reality that both sides preferred not to acknowledge openly. The humans had lost every major battle but won the war by changing what victory meant. They had proven that some things were more important than survival, and that the desire for freedom could overcome any military advantage. The galaxy had learned that tyranny carried a price that even the mightiest empire might not be willing to pay. Standing at the viewport of his command ship, Zexithara looked out at the stars and wondered how many other species were studying the human example and preparing their own resistance movements. The Caltherian Empire still ruled vast territories and commanded powerful forces, but it would never again feel invincible. The humans had taught the universe that freedom was possible, and that lesson could never be unlearned.